Talk Shoes. Recorded live.
Welcome to the Virtualization Security Podcast Roundtable, episode number 105. Geez, I was going to say 1,000. Not there yet. That's 10x where we are. Our panelist today is Eben Rodriguez, who is an IT industry veteran, now serving as a cloud solutions advisor for CA Technologies. Mike Foley, who is joining us as well. He's the VMware Technical Marketing. He's on the VMware Technical Marketing team, where his focus is security of the vSphere platform, and the author of the VMware Hardening Guide that's under review right now. Mrs. Y is joining us again. She enjoyed it so much last time and has decided to come and harass us some more, so thank you very much for joining us. He's a recovering Unix admin, if you know what such a thing is. Yeah.
Welcome.
Myself, Edward Halecki, a.k.a. TechSwill in the VMware Communities Forum and just about everywhere else, and author of several books. One of them is VMware vSphere and Virtual Infrastructure Security, as well as VMware ESXi and the Enterprise. Our special guest today is Pete Nicoletti, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for VirtuStream. And before that, you were actually, wasn't you the same role at Terramark, or a similar role?
Similar role, different title, VP of Security Engineering, and thank you for inviting me, and look forward to this.
Look forward to having you. Now, VirtuStream is a really intriguing company from a cloud services company. As I actually had, Pete and I have had a number of different conversations about that. So, Pete, why don't you give us a brief 5-minute what you do and why you do it for VirtuStream? Sure.
Well, VirtuStream, as a quick introduction, is very uniquely focused on the enterprise. We have a completely different approach to offering up infrastructure as a service. We don't focus on test and dev and credit card swipe type workloads. We're really focusing on enterprise workloads and things like ERP applications, and to that point, we're the largest cloud provider to SAP type customers. We have over 80 platforms out there, production platforms. So everything we do is enterprise class for both our commercial and federal customers. We use the biggest, most fastest, most secure devices, tools, products, services, capabilities that we can find because, our customers are trusting us with, production data, and we have some great customers, Florida Crystals and Goodyear Vance and lots of other customers I can't mention that, in the soda business and, different civilian agencies within the government, lots of other manufacturers that, you'd see in the Fortune 50 or Fortune 100. So a lot of things that we do, we have to offer, since we're basically an outsourced provider, we have to do things better than what the customer can do. So it has to run faster, it has to be more efficient, it has to be cheaper, and it has to be more secure. And if we can't prove all those things, then we have no business, trying to talk customers into using our platform. So we have a lot of intellectual property and some really cool innovations where we came up with the concept of the micro VM, which is a unit of measure. We believe that the cloud should be consumption-based rather than other types of pricing models that are out there, where you pay for what you get. It's truly a utility model rather than a committed model. Everything that we do is also OpEx. So all those different services that we can bolt onto our product or our service, are all consumption-based as well. So we've negotiated with all our vendors and partners to have a very low-cost OpEx type licensing method for all the different security services and other things that we do. So my role there is as Chief Information Security Officer, which is relatively recent, is pretty much in charge of all compliance, schedules, audits, all the tools that we use. I'm very involved in product management, and I'm on the change control board, of course, security board, our risk analysis team, the forensic team, lots of other groups I help run or am a participant of, and it's been a blast. We have a really great customer set. We have a world-class management team, and we just have hired nothing but A players, and we're coming up on 300 employees. We've got 40 or 50 recs out. Sales have been incredibly successful. We have some great partners that we'll perhaps talk about during your podcast, and we're pretty extremely optimistic about our future. We just got Gartner Magic Quadrant Visionary in only 3.5 years, so really a fast-moving company that's doing a lot of things right.
And one thing that was interesting when I was talking to Pete at his offices recently, I went there, is that you guys can dial security to 11 if necessary, and you're fairly transparent about what you use, which I actually kind of like. In fact, you announced it as a piece of some PR pieces that I saw across my desk, which was different than most other cloud providers, where they basically say, yeah, we can dial it to wherever you need to be, but we're not going to tell you.
Yeah, and we've seen
how
that
do you gain
requirement
that level
from customers.
How do you implement that level of transparency?
Well, it was, based on some history that I had where I was very challenged in responding to customers' requests for audit information and, peeking behind the curtain. And, with sports and war and, MSSP services, sometimes you don't want to see how the sausage is made. But in our case, because your auditors and you or customers are counting on us how we're doing their compliance for them, I brought that kind of a philosophy to the company. We were kind of closed when I came in, and I felt some resistance, but I said, look, this is what the customers want. They need this. They need to be able to come on site and do audits. They need to be able to know where their data is. A lot of our competitors have issues with that, but we don't really, because we always know where the customer's data is. And especially, Ed, as you've dug in deep on Intel TXT and geofencing and geocompliance and what we've done over the last 1.5 years supporting that and being the first public provider of that. Knowing where the customer's data is, knowing what we're doing on your behalf, being able to build a RACI chart based on what your compliance framework is and what we do and what you do. Those are things that are in our DNA now, and have been, we don't ever get well, you said you were going to do this, or you promised to do this. We don't get those kind of conversations, and I was really tired of those conversations in the past life. So we've really fixed that to the other side of the spectrum.
That's actually go on, Mrs. Wise.
How do you separate that out? You say that you can tell a customer where his data actually resides, at rest or in transit, and how do you, or is it just at rest?
Well, both.
Okay, and how do you track that?
Well, starting at, say, our cloud orchestration software, our core product is Extreme. Through the management panel, it's very obvious as to what data center it is in, what cluster it's in, what server it's in, where it's physically located, down to literally a rack location while it's a virtual machine. And there's a lot of neat things that go along with that profile, because we have security, we have intrusion detection and firewall that go along with that VM. We have all kinds of other little personality that moves with where that VM is located, and being able to identify where that is key. And then, of course, nothing new. We're a NetApp shop, so with the NetApp tools, which that's something that we're thinking about exposing to the portal, being able to show very transparently where the data is. But that's typically an on-site audit where we actually will take them to the data center, show them which storage system that they're on based on their response times, because we have different IOP type response time storage and archival storage. So depending on what subsystem on, we've called it a light bright exercise, where we actually will flash lights on what's driving.
Is this a read-only situation for reporting and monitoring, or do they actually have a certain level of control with Xstream when they're interacting with their cloud?
Over storage, as far as how big it is, and what level of storage it is, what kind of response time it needs to be, and how it's backed up, whether it's backed up with our archival system or whether it's backed up with our disaster recovery systems, which are based on snapshots and moving it to an alternative data center. And then they have programmatic control on where that can go based on PII and legal requirements. We have a lot of government customers that say, look, that can only be Konos. We have other customers that say, look, this has got to stay here and not here, and we can enforce all those moves. But it's all controlled through the panel.
And does your panel expose the location of where it has traveled through? In other words, you may tell us, your panel could say, yeah, you were here and here, but you actually, can you tell us where you went through? So, yeah, to get from here to here, we had to go through here.
That's a good one.
If I'm moving my data across the nation, I may be moving it from data center to data center until I get to where I need to be, based on space requirements or wherever else I need.
There is quite a bit of logging, and we do have typically year-long audit trails with logs. I'm wondering if our WAN has any type of, because it goes over an IPsec tunnel for customers, so I'm sure there's some kind of logging at that point.
I think the gods of VoIP are kicking in.
Hey, Mike?
Yeah.
You there? Can you use a landline or?
It's not me.
Ah, okay.
Testing. This is Pete. Testing 1, 2, 3. Is it my problem?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I think so.
I hear you just fine. That's odd.
I heard one yes and one think so.
Even?
I
can hear you. Okay. Mrs. Y?
I can still hear everything.
I think it's just you, Mike.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So I've got a question. Edward had put up in the chat, and I was thinking exactly the same thing when he typed it. Brian Gracely did a thing online, a whiteboard thing online, talking about VirtuStream's use of TXT and geolocation and stuff. Is that how you're able to tell folks where their stuff is leveraging that type of capability?
That's exactly right. Yeah, Brian Gracely is one of our shining stars, and he's sat through enough TXT training classes that I've given that he's really taken it to the next level. So he has a very good understanding of how it works, and that's exactly right. With our, we've taken TXT as a check mark, as a supply chain risk, that's nice to have, and we've wrapped programmatic enforcement around it of, geolocation and geofencing, which a lot more of our customers are interested in. And we've also added to that a little bit of, professional services kind of interrogation of, hey, we have this feature, and you liked it when we demoed it to you, but now it's time to use it. Let's go through the countries that you're doing business with, match that up with our data centers throughout the world with, which one can this move to, which one can it move to. And with that notion and our portal, it's pretty straightforward to say this, but, whitelist this and blacklist that. And then, like Mrs. Y or someone asked before, the audit trail is pretty decent on where it lands. I think the transit question I still might need to look into a little bit more, and I think I have some answers there, but I might have to come back to the group on that.
Now, are you primarily a VMware infrastructure or VMware and other stuff?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Ed. We're right now, of course, most of our own hosting is done on VMware, but our cloud orchestration software, the Extreme software, can move workloads between different virtualization stacks. So between KVM and Amazon and VMware, some of it is as easy as click and click. Others requires a little bit of tool and conversion. But we're, pretty much every stack, including, OpenStack, is on the roadmap to be supported, because not only do we want to move and orchestrate workloads between them, but we're also, because of some recent purchases or former purchases, we want to be able to have an open brokerage model where people can list their resources and exchange workloads based on availability of cloud resources and do all kinds of things in that area.
And you're planning to leverage the TXT functionality in all of those different stacks?
Well, some customers will have the TPM chip and have it turned on, and we'll be able to gather the specs on it, and that will lead to a higher security stack and a higher trust, and actually perhaps higher revenue per minute or per hour for that customer. Whereas if they don't have it, then that's a lack of foundational trust, and they'll be penalized by it by not offering or not exposing that or not having that within their platform. As everybody knows, there's lots of people out there that are using white box servers that are never going to be TXT. The folks that are using serious enterprise platforms that support not only TXT but other things like AES and I for encryption optimization at the chipset level. Those kind of people should also be rewarded with, not only better performance, but also better numbers.
So talking about encryption, by the way, that was Mike. This is a
segue.
Yeah, you and I had an interesting conversation just before we started this talk. You guys use a number of different encryption technologies, from SafeNet Protect V to Vormetric, to provide different layers and levels of encryption within inside your environment. Can you explain your rationale for choosing Vormetric, which is an NVM one, versus an external one like Protect V? You also use some of the other aspects of SafeNet's portfolio. How do they all tie together? And then there's, when we finally look at that, it's the whole encryption inside the VM or outside the VM implies that the data is still available to the bad actor depending on where they are in your network. That's an interesting
a multi-part question, Ed. Here we go.
Yeah, always is. So let's start with the easy. Why Vormetric and why Protect V?
Let's even start before that. I've had encryption on the brain for a long time, and I think I even shared with you one time the picture of the license plate on my conversion band is the word encrypt. So it's been a fun thing for me to talk about for a long time. I even have a three-way handshake with Diffie at a trade show. So encryption has been kind of fun for me. So when I came to VirtuStream, we had, of course, we had IPsec squared away in transit, and we had good archive encryption and deduplication. What we were looking for was a lot of the workload as well as the insider threat type protection. And so, we're really a hardcore SAP shop, and we needed a tool that was basically a shim, an OS shim, based on OS and based on database used, that could prevent everything other than the approved application to access the data. So it really nixes the insider threat, the VirtuStream database administrator from looking at that ESX server, going to the database, pulling it off, reading it, using other tools to look at the database. It just can't happen at ciphertext.
So how is this different than, say, tokenization that somebody like CipherCloud uses?
Well,
is that just a different approach?
Tokenization is a little bit different than encryption, of course.
Right.
You're seeing a representation of the data, and it has its uses, but hardcore database encryption is for the types of use cases that we're seeing our customers do is what they're needing. I mean, tokenization is great for other challenges like passing credit cards from merchant devices through the network. That's a great use case for tokenization. But for an SAP workload running on Microsoft, it's not really too applicable there.
Because it's all there, it's all in one location, and there's nothing. I guess tokenization is more appropriate when you have a front end in one place and you have the processing of the back end.
There you go.
Right.
For data in transit.
There you go. Mostly for data in transit. And we were looking for a solution that had an extremely robust key management and a wide-ranging ability for key management. We did not want to have any kind of opportunity for encryption blackmail. So in our case, it takes 2 people to launch the missile to even log into the box to administer it. So it's kind of cool that way.
So who manages the keys? Are they
Well, that's a good point. So we have the ability to go all the way from one side to the other. From the customer trusts us with the key, and we do our best to encrypt it and protect it and manage it, just like we would if we were the customer. And then we have other customers who are appropriately paranoid about their key, and we have a complete key exchange ceremony where we kind of goof around a little bit about it, but it's that important. We deliver it in a briefcase with an armband around it, and we sign off for it, and it's put in their safe. And we also give them the configuration of the device that's managing the key, which is kind of different. So in other words, not only do we give them the key, but we give them every bit of the process around how their application is being encrypted, so that they could literally go somewhere else, download the SafeNet VP, development kit, not the development kit, the virtual appliance, install that configuration, throw the key on it, and in maybe half an hour, they would have a completely separate instance of what they would need to be in business. So it's not just the key, but it's everything else around it that is kind of difficult to recreate sometimes.
But the thing is about encryption in the stack, to me, is even though you segregate the keys that way with a lot of physical security and delivery and process around it, you still have the problem that if someone could get into the virtual environment at the level that they need to be, which is basically the administrator or the hypervisor, which you have people that's what they do. And I know you have a lot of safe controls around that. But, it's a big question. What's the difference between a real administrator and a really good electronic copy of that administrator. How do you prevent that admin from actually getting access to the memory where that key is living that encrypted the database? Because it's always going to be in memory inside of VM today.
It is, and certainly there's risk there, but the attempt to mitigate that is very, very significant, Ed, as you and I have gone round and round. I know this is an interesting area and one that does require additional development, and there's going to be some winner product out there for sure that can handle this. In fact, you and I were talking about one that we're kicking around that does east-west VM to VM encryption, so that mixes one area of the risk. But you're right about the memory. So, it starts with a considerable amount of physical controls. We do not have people walking through our data centers and walking up to ESX servers and, shoving in a USB key and loading their tools up. That just is not possible.
At some point, you have to trust a person.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of trust,
and then
there's a ton of auditing, and there's a ton of monitoring, and there's a ton of background checks, and
you have to trust the person, and then you have to verify with appropriate auditing tools.
As Reagan said, trust but verify. And then, that's a good point. We give you the tools to be able to verify that. Okay. We even set up logging to where it goes to our log servers and syslog servers, but we can also send logs of what people are doing on servers directly to clients as well. So
that kind of brings up another point. So if I have tenant A and tenant B running in your environment, and you send, and tenant A says, send me all your logs, wouldn't it be possible to infer that other information of other tenants might be in that log?
We're pretty careful about that. So
you sanitize the logs before you send them?
Excuse me?
You sanitize the logs before you send them out?
We sanitize them, and depending on what tool is creating them, they're typically tagged with a customer number. There's a lot of things that are VLAN tagged by customer. That is a challenge. I'll tell you that. It's a good, you're pointing out something that I don't think we have fully solved, but I think it's maybe 75% there.
I had suggested a while back that there be
guys, and Mike and Pete, you guys are talking over each other. So, Mike, your comment, then Pete, you can respond.
Yeah, I had suggested a while back, I had talked with Edward about this, that there was an industry standard for anything that generates a log that would include a tenant ID that would be common across all sorts of devices. So if you've got logs coming from switches, storage, control plane, so on and so forth, that you would be able to collect logs from all of them and be able to sort on tenant ID.
I love it.
I just don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but I think for going forward in a secure multi-tenant environment, we need to have that sort of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of network support for that already being built into certain protocols, like the STT protocol, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's also a standards body, I think, around the cloud ID. It's a unique identifier across clouds, not just within inside of a cloud. And I'll have to look up the information.
Yeah, frequently logging is always forgotten.
Yes, absolutely. Other than that,
we're actually, one last comment, we're actually taking that into consideration. We're doing a lot of work with software-defined networking, and since that can move the pipes around pretty quickly and automatically behind people's worlds, being able to log what we're doing on behalf of the customer is something that we're trying to build into our software-defined networking solution. So, yeah, I'll definitely be following developments in this area. It's a good good challenge.
Yep.
Well, one thing you can use today is the SDN ID. It's unique across your whole data center for your tenants, right? I know we're not going to solve it here, but what do you guys think?
Mm-hmm.
What,
not everything that's spitting out a log is including that.
Yeah, can you expand on SDN ID?
There's a unique ID inside of VXLAN, inside of some of the other SDN protocols that have a unique ID per tenant.
Yeah, well, they're not consistent right now, and there's different limitations. You have VLANs can go, 4 bits up to 4,000 VLANs. VXLAN has a limit, and STT has a much higher limit of millions. It's a much longer field, so we don't really have a unique way to consistently do that across all the different protocols. You'd need some sort of database to track that.
Oh, there's a tool for someone to build.
So I've got another question. I ran into this yet again today, another case of prove to me how we can trust the hypervisor. Are you seeing that type of questioning coming from your customers' security folks?
What was the question? Prove to me the security of your hypervisor?
Yeah. Regardless of which hypervisor you're using.
That's pretty much every day. We have a
I'm just curious how you guys respond to it.
It's a big, long PowerPoint and lots of live demonstrations. I think it starts with, we were also talking about hardening. We've done a lot of interesting work there, but then, of course, Ed just pointed me out to something I was totally unaware of, and that's the new VMware hardening guide that's on his website. So I was sending that out to my team to take a look at it because of the federal projects that we're doing and the FedRAMP requirements, we've looked at the DoD STIGs, we've looked at a lot of other best practice guides, and we're also playing around with another interesting hardening application. I don't know if the group has heard of NAPSIS yet, but that's something in the SAP world that we're using. ONAPSIS. So it's beyond like a Retina or standard security scanner. It's actually application specific. So we have 4 or 5 different tools that we lock down ports and services and patches on ESX and the OS and the applications, because we really look at everything rather than just the hypervisor software. And then, as one of those things about visibility, we share those scan results with our customers. We don't just share cover sheets on how many criticals or highs or whatever. We actually show, what we're doing. Depending on the environment, it could be a daily. A lot of other environments are weekly, others are monthly, others are quarterly, and I think that's the least. We don't do any yearlies anymore. That just doesn't work. But being able to prove how hard they are is key, and what kind of process that we have for patching them. We talk about our change control process and show our ticketing system, and there's no magic bullet there. It's actually a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of monitoring and a lot of reading and just knowing what other customers are doing, and we're on the VMware Technical Advisory Group, so getting some feedback there, and there's no magic bullet. I wish there was.
I've been trying to
get your inputs for the hardening guide in.
So actually,
get your input.
I'm sending it out to my group today, and you will certainly get feedback. And I appreciate your efforts in writing it.
Thanks.
So, Mike, since we are talking a little bit about the hardening guide, I want to ask Pete a question. How do you bring in something new? like a new version of the Hardening Guide other than sending it to your guys? How do you actually finally implement it? Say
Well,
this is what we're going to go forward
our security group does have a pretty nice lab where everything is kind of fleshed out. Right now we're testing. There's probably about 12 different things that we're testing right now, from firewall rule auditors to other encryption technologies to things that we're doing on HANA with encryption that's kind of unique. So the lab is very well equipped, and we wish we had more time with it, but that's one thing we have is no lack of equipment. So typically it'll go through the paces. A couple guys will look at it. They'll, in a lot of cases, run customers' dummy data on it just to make sure, because we have a lot of very large databases that we support. So depending on whether it's a DLP tool or a database access monitoring tool or an application whitelisting tool or an anti-malware tool or even a patch that may break a lot of things, we run that through a little test dev lab as part of, in certain cases, as part of our change control. But specifically to your question, if there's something that we think is going to break our world, we do have two different systems that we tested on before we go into production, and then anything that can possibly interfere with production is managed through the change control process. And depending on what the customer is and what time of night might be a good time for them. A lot of our guys have had no time off on weekends for the last year or so.
So the extreme wrapper that you have, that's part of the secret sauce that VirtuStream offers, correct?
Right.
Okay, so what is that written in? What does that actually run on?
Our cloud orchestration software.
What is that? Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you have internal resources that have developed that in-house, and that's part of what's being patented?
That's actually our second biggest team is our application development team. It's led by a gentleman who was instrumental at PGP and Dr. Shaw Chang, and most recently of VMware, and I think he was very instrumental in some of the development of 3.x VMware. So, and then how
do you do in-house penetration testing on that and assessment, or do you actually job that out? Do you get like a second pair of eyes on that somehow?
Yeah, both. Yeah, we have a very strong SDLC practice and agile development life cycle, and that's another thing that's funny that you asked. We actually share our SDLC documents with clients that show what tools we use. We take it way past OWASP type scanning, our regression testing, build security in rather than as an afterthought. So there's quite a bit of, there's a lot of training involved in that. We have 3 or 4 different tools that we scan it with, plus we also use, some Foundstone and some other stuff from third-party auditors. Plus, as part of our agreement with some of our large customers, they take the code and we escrow it, and they've scanned it. So,
you're talking about scanning a lot and vulnerability assessments and auditing, but what kind of security research are you doing to determine how easily it can be broken? I mean, are you doing active penetration testing against it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We have some third-party groups that have 0 days in their back pocket that they don't share with anyone else. That we'd have to go under a little bit of non-disclosure to share, but then once again, in the area of transparency, we do actually share those types of results with customers, and and we've actually devised new types of tests with customers that have a certain particular requirement, and we'll come up with a way to look at it from, we've just sold our software to a cellular provider outside the country, a very large provider.
How does that work if based on the encryption restrictions, the export restrictions? How do you deal with that?
So we fully follow all of the encryption restrictions, and I'll tell you what, the contract negotiations and involvement in lawyers at that point sometimes makes my eyes cross. I'm on those calls and have to provide, guidance to our company, and we've had to have external counsel on it a couple times. It's very challenging. We actually have ITAR ear clients that we have reporting requirements for, so we're hit at ITAR ear from multiple different levels, from export compliance ourselves as well as supporting export monitoring and compliance for clients hosting in our cloud.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. I mean, one of the challenges that AWS, for example, has is that they don't have a lot of restrictions on who goes and gets an EC2 instance. I mean, how do you have government clients, how do you guarantee to your tenants that, how do you judge do you have any kind of qualifications in the way that you decide on who's going to be a tenant for you, and do you, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few? How do you handle that?
That's a fabulous question, and we actually have quite a serious vetting process. We're not a credit card go and swipe type company, so there is a whole checklist that our sales teams and accounting teams and contractual teams actually go through. I mean, we don't have a customer that we have not visited on site. I mean, that's the kind of white glove type analysis that we do, done in Bradstreet numbers and references, and I mean, it's quite serious. There's no anonymous users on our cloud.
Well, what customer won't you take, for example? Is there a type of customer that you have turned down for security reasons, to protect the resilience and the integrity of your other customers?
We have turned down one kind of recently. They were trying to be a distributor into some countries that just weren't in our best interest, so it was a small deal, so it wasn't too big of a risk. So the sales management wasn't too upset when we vetoed it. And we do have different clouds based on who you are. So we have a federal cloud, so all the federal guys are on their own cloud mainly because of search warrant type concerns. They really have they're the ones that write the Patriot Act, but they don't want to be subject to the Patriot Act, so it's kind of interesting that way.
So all those servers are in Canada?
Actually, some are. Some are.
Well,
but you're right. That is a huge
what compliance?
Challenge. Go ahead.
So what compliance initiatives do you have to meet? So you have federal compliance initiatives. Do you have PCI DSS data there, or?
Yes. You name the compliance framework, and we're dealing with it. And most of them, our auditors are auditing us to that standard so that we can assert what parts are appropriate to the client. So certainly we have a PCI DSS 2.0 cloud, which is great. So we can take on PCI workloads.
Do you do HIPAA as well? Do you have HIPAA data there?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
HIPAA's kind of cool, and both of these we have the entire spreadsheet of the entire law. So with HIPAA we have whatever it is, 163.x. So we have all 50 components of HIPAA and high tech in a spreadsheet, and each one we say, what do we do and what do you do? We also have the contractual amendments for the business partnership as far as HIPAA data. We also share the entire PCI DSS audit. We redact certain proprietary things, but for the most part, 99% of the audit is presented to the customer so that they can see what we're doing.
With PCI DSS, are you so if a customer comes to you and they want to mix scope and non-scope data, can you separate can you prove to them that you're separating out the data so that you don't have cross scoping?
We typically don't get to that level with a client. They set up their environments and how they manage the databases that are attached to certain servers. That's typically in their world. So that would be more of a customer responsibility than us.
You're saying if an auditor comes, so if they obtain a virtual private cloud from you, and they're supposed to keep that separate. I mean, they should actually, if there's PCI data and non-PCI data, in theory, they need two separate virtual private clouds, I would say, because otherwise then the whole thing.
We set up virtual machines.
Okay.
We set up clusters that are different, and we segment those with VLANs and firewalls and multiple firewalls.
And not only that, if you encrypt, it adds even more. So if you are encrypting your data in the database using Vormetric or something like that, and you're encrypting the VMs using ProtectV, you have a segregation even at the storage layers. I'm assuming you do that if the customer requires it.
You nailed it. That's exactly some of the approaches that we do.
I got a question about that. So I would imagine that for a highly secure environment that needs to be audited, you need to have some extra bells and whistles on there that you might not need if you're just doing testing and you don't have all the confidential data in there. So is there a performance impact to turn on all these extra security things, extra logging, extra auditing, extra encryption? And then if so, what's the performance impact? Have you been able to measure that? And also, is there an additional cost for that? How do you show the value of that cost?
That was the question I was going to ask, because you said cost is consumption based. If I ask you to turn on the bells and whistles, does that up my cost?
It sure does.
But you're consuming more something.
Yep. Yeah. Well, the cool thing is each one of them is optional. So certain customers extend their tools into our environment, and other customers say, look, I want you to run that tool, and you manage AV and anti-malware and DLP and DAM and encryption, et cetera, and logging. Other customers say, you don't need to turn on logging, you just need to send me the logs. So it's cool to be flexible. But you're right, it does add extra cost, but the cool thing is each one of those is a menu item so that you're only paying for what you consume. But the other part of the question I wanted to answer, I'm trying to think of it right now, is a cool question, and we had a great answer for it too. Oh, the performance, yeah. So that's, since in our DNA, it is so performance-centric with SLAs on performance and application response time. Using, among others, we have NIMSoft agents that monitor application response times. And we have other things, the synthetic transactions, all the other tricks that you do. And by changing the environment, we're able to see before and afters. And for example, encryption penalty, we have a real good internal white paper. We ran a very big load for a customer and did a before and after type encryption scenario, and we literally got it was tough to measure. It was like 3 to 4%. So it was well within realm of easy ROI. And then we do a lot of things that, like for example, we use a lot of taps that take the burden off other devices. And for example, IPS devices and forensic devices will use taps and VLAN aggregation devices to make sure that our switches and routers are not burdened with any additional processing or latency that might occur. based
I mean,
on
that's kind of standard. That's kind of industry standard, though. I mean, most people aren't using span ports, especially because you drop a lot of traffic with a span port.
Yep.
But so, I mean, but I think it's important to note. I mean, I hear you saying, you're using commercial products for monitoring and SLAs and everything else. But I think so. What's so special about the way that you're doing it that enhances performance over, as a customer, what do you got that Amazon doesn't have for me?
Well, that's a great question. Let's go right to the heart of the matter. So one of the innovations that Virtustream has is that micro VM. So it's a unit of measure that consists of memory, CPU, IOPS, and network. Mm-hmm. And it allows us to know down to, think of it as a kilowatt, the kilowatt hour. We're able to understand what the customer's consumption is in such a granular fashion that most customers had no idea what their environment response times were. But when they move their environment to our environment, every time it's been faster. It's usually like a 30 to 40% speed increase because of our unit of measure, because of our optimization of VMware. We have a couple guys that have a couple of patents in this area of VMware optimization and memory optimization that we have that no one else has. It might be great to have them on the call because they could get into it far deeper than I can.
I mean, is there some secret sauce in there that you guys have that are unique to you in terms of VMware? I mean, because that's the secret with a lot of cloud providers, right? I mean, everybody, it's not straight out of the box. I mean, there's got to be some custom stuff that you're doing, some in-house development stuff that's going to maximize that performance.
That's exactly what it is. And unfortunately, I'm the security guy and not the VMware optimization guy. So, Matt and
I want to pull us back to a discussion of security and compliance instead of performance. Cool. Unless we were going to talk about using those performance counters to actually determine if you were breached, but that's a different subject entirely. Mike, you have a question. And I responded already, but that's a different response.
You responded with, that's not my question. So you had mentioned working with auditors and stuff, and I know a number of years ago you mentioned the word virtualization auditors. There's a panic attack, and the answer is no, you can't do that. That seems to be changing, and I'm wondering what your experiences have been around auditors and how they have started to accept virtualization workloads that have compliance requirements.
That's a great question. So the first time we did our first PCI audit was last year, around June, and we made sure we used the 2.0 guidance from PCI. But more importantly, when we were looking at the auditors, we actually found one that was involved in the PCI SIG, Special Interest Group for Virtualization. We wanted an auditor that was going to go deep rather than scratch his head when he got to the EFX server. So we took the problem on head on. So rather than ignoring that risk or trying to find an auditor that was going to give us a light touch, we found one that was going to go that literally was VMware certified. That's the kind of auditor that we selected for our first pass audit. And we change auditors yearly. So we're in the final selection rounds, and we've been one of our very large customers recommended an auditor that was that did a lot of their virtualization security, as well as being at QSA. So we've taken a hard look at them, and we're selecting them to be our auditor. So that's a great question, but with our world being, this being one of our biggest risks, I want my auditor and insist that my auditor know about virtualization risks and technical issues as good or better than even we are doing, and can apply what they're seeing at other places for either a compensating control or a fine.
Has it been a challenge to find those types of auditors?
Currently, yes. I suspect that's going to change over time, but currently...
So there's a good market out there for people.
Like if you talk to an FSA 16 auditor, a CPA, and said, my whole world's virtualized, and I want you to look at those controls, they may not go deep. They may not know how to go deep and may not know what questions to ask.
But they don't go deep in the non-virtualized world. I mean,
there
let's
you go.
face it. It's a checkbox mentality, and an auditor does not provide security. I mean, there's very little overlap there, and that's the problem with the whole audit kind of mentality.
Just because you're compliant doesn't mean you're secure.
An auditor is measuring compliance, which is dictated by legislation. So compliance moves at the speed of legislation. Security must move at the speed of the network. And you can't wait.
Hackers. At the speed of hackers.
Yeah. You gotta go faster than the speed of the network. But which brings us to the question of the hardening guide. Mike, is there anything new you would like to add onto that?
Yeah, so I've released the release candidate of the hardening guide. I did that a week ago. I'm hoping to get as much input as possible so that I can get the final release for the vSphere 5.1 hardening guide out within the next week or so. And if you're listening and you have inputs, please send them to me or post them on the communities or what have you.
You know what I can recommend?
Carrier pigeons still work?
What's that?
Carrier pigeons still work?
No, we shoot them down here in Hubbardston.
I could recommend that. Have you reached out to some of the one of the great groups out there is Nova Hackers. It's in the Northern Virginia area, and a lot of times if you post to a group like that, they will give you excellent feedback on hardening guides like this. A lot of them consult to the government and have contributed to some of the NIST standards.
I will look into that.
Yeah, if you need help with it, I'm on the Nova Hackers group list, so I'd be happy to help you out with that.
Okay.
Definitely, that would be of great interest for everybody, actually. Thank you.
Yeah, Fatelick is on that. Members of Mandiant are actually in there.
I did have one hardening guide related question. Was the adoption of SCAP? Are you guys seeing that? Is it something that you would want delivered as part of a hardening guide, or is the Excel spreadsheet good enough for now?
I'd love to see it. This is Pete speaking. I'd love to see it incorporated. We have, once again, back to the federal, we're not seeing that at all in the commercial space, but it's a requirement in the federal space. So, and that's one of the reasons why we picked the GRC tool that we did, because it totally is integrated with SCAP so that we can have that full life cycle of scan, categorize, ticket, remediation effort, and then rescan and verify. So I'm fans of the SCAP process.
Okay.
And I've actually been working on XCCDF versions of some of the rules. But you got to remember that each of those rule sets are going to be distinctly different based on what you have inside your environment. So my XCCDF rules for my set of VMs are based on my names of my VMs. They're not going to be the same as what's going to be inside of some other tenant, which is going to be rather intriguing going forward for developing them based on how the hardening guides are actually written on a per VM and per host level.
We're solving that with run books per client, and that's, once again, you're spotting another challenge that makes, repeatable, scalable clouds tough, because you do have individual personalities and requirements, and they have to be addressed, and not all of them can be, handled in an automatic way. So it's run books.
Going back to what we used to use in the good old days of Unix, that little book right next to the computer in the lab.
It's like 2001 called. They want their run book back.
At least it's on SharePoint now. So.
Oh, well, that's something, right? It's not a binder.
I remember the binder, and we looking around the labs on some days going, who took the binder? Put it back. We need it. We're switching out the drive. So given now that you know about this, Pete, and we're about 2 weeks away from a real version of this hardening guide, how long would it take VirtuStream to implement it? Because I'm assuming that everybody's going to say go with this because it's the latest.
Well, like I said a little bit earlier, this would be considered in the labs, and the guys would run through it, make sure that we're doing what's appropriate and valid. So there may be, I haven't looked at it yet, so I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head. The guys will probably implement it, look at scan results before and after, and the portions that are appropriate will probably pretty immediately get change controlled into our environment and our builds. We move pretty fast when it comes to good recommendations. We know that the hackers are looking at that as well, and so we move at internet speeds. We can't be dinking around. That's not going to protect our customers. So we move relatively fast, but without looking at the document and telling you which parts we're going to implement, I can't tell you that yet.
Okay. That's very good, Mike, and thank you very much for joining us, Pete. We're 3 minutes over, but I still would like the last word. Who's going to do it today? That would be Pete. Why don't you give us the last word for today?
Sure. Appreciate that. First off, I really appreciate the hardcore questions. It was like having 10 of my most advanced customers in one room hammering on me, so this was really fun. I'm glad I joined. I'm glad I joined it. But you really
at least these people aren't paying me.
You dug in deep into a lot of concerns and a lot of very appropriate challenges that we have, and I appreciate that. And hopefully my answers were transparent along with what we're doing. The last word that I think I have is we're beating the bad guys, and we're trying to beat the bad guys, and of course it's the old adage of $1 worth of offense can be beaten with $100 worth of defense. So we need to be extremely diligent. We need to work together. We need to share information like this, and this is a great forum. And we need to take it very, very seriously, because the intellectual property drain of this company or this country is totally unacceptable. Having customers in the front page of the news is unacceptable, and having risk to company or people's information is unacceptable. And I think all of us as information security professionals need to take that much more seriously and not look at it as an opportunity, but look at it as what's patriotic, what's our right duty, and learn faster, better than the bad guys. There you go.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you very much for joining us, and everybody else. I'm going to terminate the recording now. This has been the 105th episode of the Virtualization Security Podcast.